The afternoon sun baked the cracked pavement of Greenwood Springs Main Street, its heat rising in shimmering waves that seemed to slow time itself. The old sycamore trees lining the sidewalks offered patches of wavering shade, but most of the street lay bare under the relentless June sun, 95 Mercury by noon and climbing. Across the faded asphalt rolled a battered green pickup truck, its edges worn with rust, its once bright paint dulled by decades of sun and storms. Behind the wheel sat Walter Jennings, age 78, a man whose presence was as familiar to the town as the courthouse bell. His hands weathered and knotted from years of building homes and repairing what others discarded, gripped the wheel with practiced ease. His pale blue eyes, sharp beneath the brim of a faded Vietnam veteran cap, flicked from mirror to mirror as he guided the truck toward his modest home on Elm Street. The truck itself was more than a vehicle. It was a living symbol of Walter's life, a repository of tool scraps and handwritten notes. Its bed held weathered lumber boxes of nails, coils of wire, and a faded canvas bag containing a small, tattered, black notebook. Inside that notebook were names brothers in arms from another lifetime, each recorded with care, each a tether to the past that Walter carried with him, always. At the corner of Main and Chestnut, just a block from home, the truck slowed. The light flickered yellow, then red. Walter eased to a stop. The hum of the engine faltered, coughed, then settled into a familiar rough idle. The cabin smelled faintly of sawdust and old leather, a scent that had accompanied him on countless drives across Greenwood Springs. Suddenly flashing red and blue lights burst in his rearview mirror. A police cruiser swerved in behind him, tires crunching against the curb. Walter frowned, puzzled. His registration? He was certain he'd renewed it, though he wasn't as quick to remember things these days. He took a deep breath, steadying the small tremor in his left hand. Two officers stepped out. The younger of the two, Officer Tyler Rayner, no older than 25, sported mirrored sunglasses and an easy, dismissive smirk. His partner, Officer Benjamin Wade, stood taller and older, perhaps in his mid-30s, with a face that seemed caught between boredom and discomfort. Rayner approached the driver's window, rapped sharply with his knuckle. License, registration, or maybe just a good story, old-timer. Walter moved slowly, deliberately. He reached for the worn leather wallet resting atop the dashboard, then retrieved the folded registration papers from the glove box. His movements were precise, not fearful. This was not his first encounter with youthful arrogance. He handed the documents through the open window without a word. Rayner flipped through them, his lip curling. Expired tags. No visible state sticker. Is this old beast even street legal? Walter kept his gaze forward, mouth set in a thin line. The years had taught him patience where words failed. Rayner stepped back, gesturing to Wade. Pop the hood. I want to see what kind of antique we're dealing with. A small crowd began to gather, first a woman with a stroller, then a man with a small dog, and soon several others drawn by the flashing lights and the rare spectacle of confrontation in the quiet town. From the corner of her bakery window, Claire Monroe, 56, paused mid-icing a tray of cupcakes to watch the scene unfold, her expression tightening. Walter opened the door and stepped out, wincing as his right knee protested. The injury, souvenir of a distant jungle skirmish, had never quite healed. He braced himself against the doorframe, then straightened with quiet dignity. Rayner circled the truck, eyeing it like junkyard scrap. What's in the back? He barked. Walter's voice came steady low. Lumber, screws, materials for fixing Mrs. O'Neill's porch ramp. Rayner sneered. Sure it is. He motioned to Wade, who began rifling through the truck bed without care. Tools clattered to the pavement. Each box bore careful labels in Walter's own hand. O'Neill ramp, VFW haul chair rail, Thompson window frame. They didn't read them. Out of your pockets, Rayner ordered, next stepping close. Walter complied without argument. Out came keys, a dulled pocket knife, a dog tag on a thin chain in the small battered black notebook. Rayner snatched it before Walter could retrieve it. What's this? Some kind of code. Walter's voice was even. Names, men I served with. Some gone, some I check on. Rayner flipped through it with a smirk, then tossed it carelessly to the ground near Walter's boot. The old man bent slowly, retrieving it with deliberate care, brushing away the dust. Across the street, a teenager aimed his phone, recording. A snide hashtag appeared beneath the video, Jersham, confused vet busted. Walter returned to the curb as instructed, lowering himself onto the sun-heated concrete. He folded his hands in his lap notebook clasped between them and stared straight ahead at the rustling branches of a distant oak. Not in defiance, not in shame, but in control. Inside her bakery, Claire's hands trembled around the icing bag. She wiped them on her apron, heart pounding. She knew who Walter Jennings was. Everyone did or should have. She remembered the morning after the 2012 flood when she'd found him waist-deep in water, guiding elderly neighbors to higher ground with nothing but a flashlight and rope. But here, he sat, dismissed, disrespected, recorded for ridicule. Rayner leaned against the cruiser, scrolling lazily through his phone. "Maybe we call social services," he said loudly. "Bet he doesn't even remember where he is." Walter's jaw tensed. He remembered plenty. He remembered the searing heat of Da Nang, the cold mud of Firebase Ripcord, the faces of men younger than Officer Rayner, who'd never come home. He remembered building that flood wall when the city wouldn't. He remembered this town before half its current residents had even been born. But none of that mattered here. Not to them. Not today. The crowd had grown. Whispers swirled. Phones recorded. And still Walter remained silent, dignified amidst the gathering storm of public humiliation. From the bakery doorway, Claire's resolve hardened. She pulled out her phone not to film but to dial. The first number she called belonged to a man who owed Walter more than gratitude, a man who still bore the scar of a rescue from a collapsed factory wall, with Walter's steady arms pulling him free. The town had forgotten. The officers had never known. But Claire remembered. And now, with her voice steady, she prepared to remind the powers that be exactly who was sitting on that sun-bleached curb. As the shadows of the sycamores stretched longer across Main Street, the moment hung suspended, poised for a reckoning that neither officer yet saw coming. The minutes stretched unbearably long on Main Street. The concrete beneath Walter's legs radiated heat nearly 110 degree corners now at ground level. His worn jeans provided little buffer. Sweat gathered beneath the brim of his cap, trickling down the weathered lines of his face. But he made no move to wipe it away. He simply watched the great oak across the street sway gently in the breeze, its green canopy rustling softly above the hum of passing cars and murmured voices. All around him, the world kept moving. People walked. Dogs barked. A child's laugh echoed faintly from a nearby yard. And yet here in this small space of sun-bleached shame, time seemed trapped, each second drawn out with excruciating clarity. Across the street, a teenager named Justin Marks, all of 16, and barely aware of his own ignorance, grinned behind his phone screen. The short video he'd captured, Walter seated officers circling the battered truck in full frame, was already racing across town via a confused vet busted. The caption read, "Gramps forgot how to drive. Cops got him sorted." Within minutes, the video gathered dozens of likes, then hundreds. Comments piled on some mocking, others clueless. "Should have stayed home, old man. Betty still thinks it's 1970. Somebody get this guy a ride to the retirement home." Walter, oblivious to the flood of digital derision, remained still, though one subtle sign betrayed the impact, a tightening of his grip on the notebook resting atop his lap. Inside, those carefully recorded names, penned in faded blue ink, seemed to burn hotter than the afternoon sun. Claire Monroe stood frozen in the doorway of her bakery phone, pressed tightly to her ear. Her call to Councilman Robert Lane had been brief but pointed. "They've got Walter Jennings sitting on the street like a criminal Bobby. You need to get down here, now." The response had been swift and tense. "On my way." Yet the minutes dragged. Claire paced the bakery floor, hands shaking. With each glance outside, her anger deepened. The officers lounged near the cruiser, Officer Rayner thumbing his phone smugly. Officer Wade watching Walter with something closer to unease. Nearby, the gathering crowd reflected a different mood. The initial whispers had given way to awkward silence. A few faces, older ones, began to recognize the man seated beneath the sweltering sun. "Isn't that Jennings? He built my brother's porch ramp after his stroke. Wait, that's the guy who helped during the flood, right?" But the damage was already rippling outward in digital waves. Screens glowed with the viral video. Teens on bikes giggled as they rode by, some pointing. One girl, emboldened, posed for a selfie with Walter in the background. tagging it, "Relic on the curb." Walter didn't flinch. But deep within a storm brewed not of anger, but of a quiet, aching grief. Not for himself, not for the mockery. For the widening gulf between who he had been, who he still was, and how this new world saw him a relic, a burden, a shadow of a man. Decades of service, of sacrifice, of unseen, unspoken acts, reduced now to a caricature in pixels. Officer Wade shifted uncomfortably. "Maybe we should call this in again," he muttered to Rayner. "He's just sitting there, not resisting." Rayner scoffed. "Let him sweat. Maybe he'll remember where he is." He glanced at Walter, voice rising. "Hey, old-timer, you even know what day it is?" No answer. Just the same steady gaze toward the oak tree. From the bakery, Claire's patience broke. She stormed across the street, apron fluttering. "Officers!" she called firmly. Rayner turned lips already curled in dismissal. "Ma'am, stay back. Police matter." Claire's voice didn't waver. "That man built the flood barriers when the city couldn't. My sister's house still stands because of him." Rayner rolled his eyes. "Ma'am, please return to the sidewalk." Claire stood her ground, eyes flashing. "I won't. Not while you treat him like trash." More voices began to murmur in agreement. An older couple, a father holding his child, a shopkeeper, stepping out to watch. But still the phones remained raised, filming, streaming, documenting, not just the injustice, but the community's growing discomfort. Back at the curb, Walter closed his eyes briefly, breathing slow and deep. He could hear the scorn in Rayner's voice, the half-hearted concern in Wade's. But louder still were the voices from another time, the men he'd served beside the civilians. He'd rescued, the whispered thanks of those he'd helped rebuild. "We see you. You did good, brother. Hold the line." The notebook in his lap seemed to pulse with the weight of those memories. The words within were not just names. They were a sacred ledger of loyalty and sacrifice. And today that ledger had been tossed aside like refuse. Across town, Robert Lane's black sedan tore down Maple Avenue. Claire's call had ignited a fire within him. He owed Walter Jennings a debt no council vote could repay, and he was not alone. Claire, breathless, re-entered her bakery and called another number one that would reach deeper into the town's conscience. "This is Claire Monroe. You need to come now. They've got Walter Jennings on the sidewalk and the kids are laughing. They don't know. They need to be taught." The woman on the other end replied, voice tight, "I'm coming." Back on Main Street, the heat pressed harder. Walter's body ached. His heart ached deeper still. He had known indignity before, but rarely so public, so casual, so easily amplified by devices he barely understood. Yet through the haze of grief and heat, resolve flickered. He would not rise until permitted. He would not lash out. Dignity would be his shield, silence his stand. And as the breeze stirred the pages of the notebook in his lap, it carried with it the faintest echo of those he honored still. Steady, old man, steady. As the streetlights began to flicker beneath the coming dusk, unseen wheels were already turning calls, made debts remembered. The next chapter of this moment was racing toward them on the hot winds of Greenwood Springs. The light had begun to change on Main Street. Long shadows stretched across the cracked pavement as the sun sagged toward the western hills. The oppressive heat softened by degrees, but for Walter Jennings seated motionless on the curb, the burden of the day remained heavy. Around him the crowd had grown dense, no longer just idle onlookers or smirking teens. Now older faces filled the edges of the scene, their eyes dark with recognition and rising unease. Yet still the glow of phone screens persisted. The viral post, "Our Sherardmaker confused vet busted," had surged beyond Greenwood Springs, by now reaching neighboring towns and distant relatives who watched in dismay. Across the street, Claire Monroe stood at her bakery window, arms folded tightly. Her second call had gone through to Marvin Kane, editor of the Greenwood Gazette, whose father owed his life to Walter's rescue from a house fire a decade past. Marvin had promised to be there, camera in hand. But Claire wasn't the only one who had reached out. From the steps of City Hall, Deputy Mayor Jonathan Cross had emerged minutes earlier, phone pressed to his ear. The voice on the line had been tense but clear. "Sir, it's about Walter Jennings. He's sitting in the street like a criminal. The video's already everywhere." A pause, then, "Walter Jennings, the Walter Jennings." "Yes, sir." By the time Cross's black SUV swung onto Main Street, dusk had thickened. The cruiser's flashing lights still pulsed, but their effect had changed, less spectacle, now more shame. Officer Rayner, leaning against the hood of the cruiser, noticed the approaching vehicle first. His smirk faltered as he read the municipal plates. "Expecting company?" Wade asked quietly. Rayner forced a grin. "Guess someone called in the cavalry." The SUV slowed to a deliberate stop behind the cruiser. Doors clicked open. Out stepped Deputy Mayor Cross, alone, no staffers, no entourage, just him. Rolled sleeves, sharp gaze. Without a word to the officers, he crossed to Walter. "Walter," he said softly, bending slightly. "Are you all right, sir?" Walter met his eyes. "Just waiting." Cross turned, voice rising so all could hear. "Which of you detained him?" Rayner cleared his throat. I did. He was operating an unregistered vehicle. No tags." Cross cut him off with a single sharp gesture. "That man carried my brother out of a flooded basement during the '98 storm. My brother would not be alive today if it weren't for him." A ripple of silence passed through the crowd. Cross turned to Wade. "Have you verified his identity?" Wade swallowed. No, sir. We were waiting for confirmation." Cross gestured toward the SUV. A staffer stepped out carrying a slim leather folder. Cross accepted it, opened it, and drew forth several documents. "You'll find in here, Mr. Jennings' verified status as a decorated veteran, a lifetime emergency services volunteer, and confirmation that his truck holds a historic vehicle exemption, all cleared through the Department of Transportation." Rayner's mouth went dry. Wade looked away, face pale. Cross faced the crowd, now his voice steady. "You all see this man here." He held up a laminated photo, Walter, 2 decades younger, hauling a child through rising floodwaters. "This is Walter Jennings. He's rebuilt more homes, pulled more families from danger, trained more first responders than half this city council combined. And today he was made to sit on this street like a criminal." A murmur of recognition swept the onlookers. More voices rose. "He fixed my roof after the last hailstorm. He built the ramp for my mother's wheelchair. Taught my grandson CPR for free." Cross turned back to the officers. "You stopped a cornerstone of this city, and you did it without knowing, without asking." Wade stepped forward, shame etched on his face. "Sir, I'm sorry, Mr. Jennings. Truly. I saw the truck, the clothes, and I assumed." Walter studied him not with bitterness, but with a deeper weariness. His voice, when it came, was low but clear. "That's the thing, son. You assume before you cared to understand." The words hung heavy in the evening air. Cross looked to Walter. "Sir, permission to help you up." Walter nodded once. "Permission granted." Carefully, Cross extended a hand. Walter rose slowly, knees stiff, back straight. The hush that followed was profound, a communal recognition of wrong done, of dignity reclaimed. Phones lowered. The teenager who had posted the mocking hashtag now looked, stricken eyes fixed on the ground. Cross faced the gathering crowd. "Let this be a lesson. We cannot afford to forget the worth of those among us. Mr. Jennings deserves not mockery but honor." A wave of regret rippled outward. Some wept quietly. Others moved forward not for spectacle but for amends. Rayner, face pale, remained rooted in place. Cross turned back once more to Walter. "On behalf of the city, you have our deepest apology." But Walter shook his head gently. "Don't apologize to me. Apologize to the next one you ignore." And with that, he gathered his notebook, his cap, and with quiet resolve began the slow walk toward his battered truck. Claire Monroe watched with shining eyes. Marvin Kane snapped the final photo, a man not defeated but dignified. As the streetlights flickered on and the first stars pierced the twilight, one truth had become undeniable. Greenwood Springs would not forget this moment, and the legacy of Walter Jennings had just been reclaimed not by force but by the quiet, unyielding strength of a life well lived. The sun had long set over Greenwood Springs, casting the town in a soft, silver glow beneath the street lamps. Yet the events of that afternoon still pulsed through its veins, through living rooms, over dinner tables, and across every glowing phone screen. The video of Deputy Mayor Cross lifting Walter Jennings from the hot concrete had already eclipsed the earlier mockery. Now a new hashtag spread like wildfire. Eat your honor, Walter. By dawn, nearly every household in Greenwood Springs had seen it. News anchors replayed the footage with reverence. Older voices on local radio called it a much-needed moment of reckoning. Even teenagers who had once sneered now posted their own apologies beneath the original video. Yet Walter remained unchanged. At first light, he rolled out of bed joint, stiff but spirit steady. The battered green truck still sat in his driveway, its dense and faded paint now a badge of honor. The first thing he did, what he'd always done, was check the notebook. The names of the stars, the handwritten notes of lives touched and friendships honored. He traced one name with a calloused finger and whispered, "Steady, brother, we keep going." By mid-morning, visitors arrived first in ones and twos, then in steady streams. Officer Benjamin Wade appeared on Walter's porch, hat in hand. His voice trembled slightly. "Mr. Jennings, I volunteered for community duty. Starting this week, I'll be helping at the VFW Hall and the Senior Center. I owe you that much." Walter regarded him with quiet eyes. "Help them because it's right, not for me." "I will, sir. I promise." Word spread. A group of local teens, among them the boy who had posted the original mocking video, showed up next, nervous and contrite. One boy carried a bucket of deep blue paint. Another held new brushes and rags. We want to help fix your truck, Mr. Jennings, if you'll let us." Walter considered them. No speech, no lecture. He simply nodded once. Work teaches more than words. And so they did. By afternoon, the battered truck gleamed anew, still old, still dented, but now lovingly restored with steady hands and a fresh coat of honor. At City Hall, Deputy Mayor Cross moved quickly. In the next council session, he introduced a resolution, the Jennings Initiative, dedicated to aiding elderly veterans with home repairs, accessibility upgrades, and community connection. The motion passed unanimously, but Walter had no desire for fanfare. When asked to speak at the announcement, he declined with simple grace. "I didn't serve for applause. I served because it needed doing." Still, the effect rippled outward. Neighbors who had once passed Walter without notice now greeted him warmly. A woman at the grocery store insisted on helping load his supplies. Parents taught their children who Walter was and why respect mattered. Even within the police department, real change began. A new training module on veteran recognition and community respect was implemented, mandatory for all officers, especially rookies like Rayner, who was reassigned to another precinct after a required series of community service appearances. And though Walter spoke little of it, the plaque beneath the old oak tree on Main Street moved him in ways he could not voice. It read, "Here stood a man who built more than homes and flood walls. He built the conscience of a community." Walter never lingered by it, but sometimes on his drives through town, lumber in the back of his truck, notebook on the seat beside him, he would pass slowly, offering the briefest nod. Life resumed its rhythm, but Greenwood Springs had changed. The viral moment had become a turning point, a visible reminder that dignity, service, and quiet strength deserved honor, not suspicion. And Walter, he simply continued. Every Saturday, he met with Wade and a group of new volunteers, young and old, at the community center. Together, they rebuilt porch ramps, repaired roofs, and restored battered fences. One morning, as Walter arrived with fresh lumber, Wade greeted him with a hesitant smile. "Mr. Jennings, we'd like to name this workshop after you, if you'll allow it." Walter placed a hand on his shoulder. "Name it for the ones we lost first." And so they did. The Brothers' Workshop, a quiet tribute to those carried in Walter's notebook and heart. Months passed. The leaves turned. Winter came and went. But one constant remained. When Walter Jennings' green truck rattled through Greenwood Springs, the world slowed. Officers stood aside, some saluting. Neighbors waved. Teenagers bowed their heads in quiet respect. And beneath it all, the deeper lesson endured, not about law or authority, but about humility, gratitude, and the unseen worth of those who serve quietly without seeking recognition. Because for Walter Jennings, as always, respect was not something one demanded. It was something one lived day after patient day, even when no one was watching.